Before we begin, I just want to give my normal disclaimer that this video is not criticizing all theists, it's merely criticizing the person I'm commentating on.
Imagine that you're stuck in some twisted dystopian future. There are billions of lottery balls in massive silos, and your life depends on drawing just one specific ball. And if you don't pull the one ball you need, it's game over. And you couldn't just draw it once, you'd have to pull it at least 3 times in a row. Now, if you actually drew the right one 3 times in a row, you wouldn't be sitting there thinking, wow, what luck. You'd probably be thinking, somehow, this lottery must have been rigged for me.
Okay, you haven't said anything wrong yet, but I have a problem with this point rhetorically. Because, yeah, I very well might think that in this situation. So what? And later on, you give a similar analogy regarding poker.
Now, to use another illustration, imagine that you're playing poker and someone pulls a royal flush. You'd probably be thinking, wow, that's a pretty lucky break. But what if they hit a royal flush again and again, say a dozen times in a row? You're not thinking luck anymore. You're thinking the dealer and the player are definitely in cahoots.
But the important question is, am I rational to believe this inherently despite the fact I don't have any evidence to back up my claim? Remember, I haven't done any independent investigating in that analogy to determine if the player is in cahoots with the dealer. I'm just assuming it because the cards are so lucky. You're essentially using as a basis for this argument that you would think this in that case, but who's to say I'm right to do so? Furthermore, if I later discover it's not the case, which I very well might given that is such a cartoonish example of cheating, nobody would ever do such a thing, therefore ironically making it less likely to be an example of cheating, because if it were an example of cheating, those behind it would be immediately caught. Would that mean I should therefore ditch this argument entirely? This doesn't make any sense.
First of all, there's the gravitational constant. If gravity were even slightly stronger or weaker, by 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, stars wouldn't form properly, and without stars, there's no life. It's like having a billion dice and them all landing on 6.
For those curious, Testify has no evidence for that being the case. He doesn't name any physicists who agree with him, or quote anybody saying such a thing. This is just a claim he makes with no support whatsoever. He goes on to list a bunch of other forces that he promises if we're just slightly different, the universe couldn't exist. He provides no evidence for any of this, so I'm just going to narrate over this part. Mind you, he also fails to prove these forces could even really be different. What would it mean for the strong nuclear force to be different by 2%, to use an example he uses? Is such a thing even possible? You're inherently making the assumption that there's an infinite number of ways the strong nuclear force could look for this argument to make sense. But we don't know if that's the case or not. That's just something you assume for the sake of your video.
Even if you start with a very low prior probability of a designer, like 1 in the 10 to the 28th, the evidence of fine-tuning raises that probability, according to Bayes' theorem, to over 99.99%.
That's less than 99.99%, not more than. My final thoughts are this. The video made a series of claims without evidence, and large chunks of the video I am not commentating on because I just repeat there's no evidence for several of the claims made. Good night, and good luck.